Everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for Smart Cities Connect in the keynote session. So we're going to be talking about real-world smart city applications here today. And I've got three smart city experts who are not just leading the field, but they're also practitioners. So we're not going to just be talking about the theory, but really talking about the real-world applications. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Jesse Bounds, who's the Director of Innovation for the City of Houston, with Samir Sharma, who's the Global General Manager for New Markets, Smart Cities, and Transportation, IoT Solutions from Intel, and Tom Scherfcliffe, who is the co-founder of Intelligent Buildings. So thanks everybody for joining us. Appreciate you spending time with us here today. Of course, this is the first time that we're doing this all virtually, so we miss being together in the same room on a stage, but this is as close as we can get given the global pandemic, so here we go. Before we dive into the meat of the session, just give us a couple of minutes of, about you, about your community or organization, and what you're really focused on when it comes to smart cities. Jesse, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Jesse Bounds, Director of the Mayor's Office of Innovation here in Houston, Texas. And also, sorry that we can't be there to be in person and network with you. But so really our smart city program in Houston is focused on resilience. So Chelsea and I have talked about how Hurricane Harvey really accelerated the growth of our smart city program in Houston. It was the second costliest disaster in US history. We had over 70 people killed, and 12% of our building stock was flooded, and 500,000 vehicles lost. And so it was just a huge impact, but it was also the action that we needed, the event that we needed to spur action and create urgency. And so it really kind of aligned all of our partners around this theme of building back better that the mayor talks about often. And I think that today is as relevant with COVID as it was during Harvey, that we need to build back better and use smart city technology to become a more resilient city. And so the way that we've done this really is to create a foundation that's for a smart city. So we've established a plan, that's the Resilient Houston Plan, that's really our North Star for smart city projects going forward. It gets all of our stakeholders aligned on the same goals and measures, and so anybody who wants to know what Houston's priorities are, you're welcome to go look at that plan, and solutions are definitely welcome. And then the next piece of it was just creating that innovation pipeline, and that's we have partnerships with all of the major universities in Houston that they can do research and development for us. We have the ION Smart and Resilient Cities Accelerator that you'll be hearing about throughout the program here, that brings startup innovation to the city of Houston and cities just broadly. And then we also have partnerships with Microsoft, for example, our Digital Innovation Alliance, and Intel as well has been a fantastic partner with the city. And so just all of those pieces really have set that foundational layer up to where we can accelerate our smart city program going forward.
Excellent. Samir, talk about, maybe the partnership with Houston and your role and what you're seeing even nationally and globally around smart cities.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do that. So my team, handles smart cities and intelligent transportation with a big focus on infrastructure globally. And that covers use cases around public safety, around transportation and mobility, as well as sustainability and resilience. If I zoom in a bit, the approach is really about enabling an ecosystem. And I'm very happy to say both Jesse and Tom, and Chelsea to some extent you as well, are fellow travelers of that ecosystem that we want to help enable, because it takes a village to have the kind of global impact in cities worldwide that we are all seeking to have as a global community. Our job is to make sure that all the best assets we have at Intel, whether it's at the edge, like computer vision and AI, or the 5G network connectivity solutions we are developing with our partners, or the data-centric cloud strategy, are all pulled together in a single cohesive narrative and presented in a frictionless way to our partners, ecosystem partners, That would include OEMs, ODMs, developers, ISVs, system integrators, but also once in a while, selectively work with the end customers to really appreciate what problems are we looking to solve. So when we sit with Jesse and have a conversation about Houston and the flood management challenges and how pandemic response needs to be hyper-focused, or talk to Tom about how intelligent buildings are such a key aspect of the overall smart cities blueprint, it helps us appreciate the end user problems. And then we go and take that information back to our wonderful designers and engineers to make sure we're building the right kind of technologies. And instead of making it an inside out view, we want to have an outside in view to guide the technology development. I'm very happy to say that because we in some ways never sell directly to the cities, we have sort of a trusted advisor role where we can come in and paint a picture of the ecosystem without any clear, direct commercial implications. And just think about it as not just a business P&L, which obviously is a big part of my responsibility, but as a way of giving back to the communities where we operate. And so it's really that holistic view centered around, let's improve the communities, let's improve the quality of life, and then work backwards from there to say, what do we need to do at the technology level to make it all happen? And how do we enable a village and ecosystem around Intel technologies to go make this a reality? And we'll talk more about the partnership and some of the stuff you're doing both with Jesse and Tom as we proceed today.
Yeah, we've been talking about ecosystems for a long time in smart cities with the US focus. And so it's really exciting to see those things come to life and have some real world examples. So Tom, I know that, your work in connected buildings, it's almost like you're building mini smart cities right in the middle of smart cities. So tell us your perspective around connected buildings and what it takes to be smart.
Well, right, and we're in the business of enabling smart buildings and smart portfolios through, advisory or assessments or managed services. But kind of as you're indicating, some of these really large developments are so large that they're actually working with the city on infrastructure and integration and just almost by necessity. But even for individual buildings, we realize how much of a part the built environment is in a smart city. I mean, if you just look out your window, you see a bunch of buildings, right, that are mostly not government buildings. And so we know that if those buildings were built or renovated since the 80s, they have lots of digital systems in them: HVAC, elevator, lighting, parking, security. What does that techno talk mean? It just means those things run on computers. They can be connected to the internet and they can send and receive data, right? Wow. So now we've got a city with all these buildings in it, if they were built or renovated in the last 40 years, they've got a bunch of digital systems and data in them. So immediately you can see that there's two things that can happen. One, they can do lots of smart building things like operational cost, sustainability, occupant experience, life safety, and of course now public health. But the other thing is they can connect to and play a role in a smart city, like first responders knowing exactly what happened and where exactly in a building, active shooter and what the building should do in that case, severe weather, public transportation. What do I do if I could know a bus was coming in 5 minutes? That might help me. It was right outside my building. Community information, even traffic. Should I leave now or not leave now? So, when you think about a smart building, there are things that happen inside it, but also now, what can it do to relatively easily connect with the city? And then one last thought is that because of that 40 years of digital systems, we also have to treat building systems and connected buildings with the same attention of cybersecurity as we have traditional IT systems. And that has not been the case, lots of cultural and technical and other reasons, but it's time, if we're going to really manifest the building as part of a smart city, that has to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, perfect. And what I really appreciate about intelligent buildings and the leadership that you bring is almost as a translator between the developer community and the technical community. I think a lot of us in smart cities, we find ourselves in that role. And then when you dial down to the actual building and development, we all speak a different language. So having all of us as translators is
everybody speaks a different language, but we're pretty sure that the real estate development and management world is special in that way.
Probably so. So speaking of the global pandemic and all of the challenges that it has provided all of us, both individually and in our communities, it's also given us the opportunity to think a bit differently. And certainly in the lens of smart cities, it's accelerated a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And now the time frame to put those into action definitely has decreased. It's time to get busy and past time to get busy. So Jesse, I know, explaining Hurricane Harvey was definitely that same level of acceleration. Let's talk very specifically about in the middle of this pandemic, in the past 6 months, what are some of the things that you were putting to action, whether they're lessons learned from Hurricane Harvey and the smart city vision that you put into place following that? What has happened and how have you reacted as a community?
Yeah, so we view solutions to COVID. Obviously, this is a real big challenge to us, but we view them in two categories, basically. There's a prevention aspect, and then there's a tracing component as well. So on the prevention side, you have, the smartest thing that you can do is just wear a mask. So that's number one. But there is ways that technology can assist. For one, we're sitting here doing a remote conference. So we're remote working, virtual services, online services are really, expediting or helping us reduce exposure, accelerating the adoption of technology, I think, as well. We also have things like disinfecting robots and touchless control systems that would prevent people from, having to touch entries or pedestrian, crossing beacons. And there's also a lot of promising technology around computer vision to track people through buildings, make sure that they're not congregating. And we have working with a company called Armored Things, which is doing exactly that, mass compliance congregation of people. We also have Zen City, which is where we're using artificial intelligence to track our communication strategies and also combat misinformation. So there's a lot of prevention stuff that's going on. But I think where we've excelled really is in the tracing category. So, this is typically contact tracing is just people picking up the phone, calling people who've had symptoms or have tested positive. You don't have really the capacity, especially in the height of the pandemic, of contact tracers to do all this work of contacting the contacts. And so we've addressed it in a couple of ways. One, we set up a survey through Qualtrics to reach out, to kind of automate the process of contacting the people that needed to be contacted. And then we've also started to look at inventive ways to find where COVID is located. And so one of the startups in our ION Smart and Resilient Cities Accelerator, WaterLens, it was a remote water quality testing solution. And they found that they could identify COVID in wastewater samples. Yeah. And so we worked with them to validate that. And really, they've been able to commercialize a product that can detect where there might be a coming outbreak, if it's at a building level or at a neighborhood level, where we might not have the testing that shows that there's something happening. We can target our testing and tracing efforts better with this technology. So it's really exciting, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in future pandemics to expand on tracing efforts.
Great. And, all of that wouldn't have happened if you didn't bring a spirit of willingness to invite new solutions and partner with people outside of government. And government absolutely has its place, honored place. But I really appreciate City of Houston and your willingness to work with partners like Intel and host the ION Accelerator. And I think that should just be absolutely celebrated as a best practice. So Samir, I know that you've worked on the ground or perhaps virtually on the ground creating
Yes.
solutions in Houston. So tell us more about that work and what you've learned and what you've produced, and tell us the story of what's been happening there.
Absolutely. I know this is a very serious topic, but I'll be lighthearted for a moment. I was telling my team, I have never been so excited about wastewater treatment and the intelligence and the data that can come from it. So we were very happy to partner with Jesse, Mayor Turner, and the rest of the team at in Houston to see what solutions can our ecosystem bring that may already exist, but also what are some of the new innovations we can bring to the table. Jesse talked about the wastewater analysis to get a sense of what is the level of aggregate infection level for this pandemic in certain areas. But another example, which has now actually been implemented across more than 100 hospitals, is a software-defined ICU bed. So we took what would be a standard hospital bed. At the height of pandemic, there was a shortage of ICU beds. So we said, can we, through instrumentation and software-defined capabilities and remote monitoring, convert this standard bed into an ICU bed? So a doctor is constantly tracking and tracing what's going on with the patient. And that converted what was sort of plain vanilla infrastructure, which is a standard bed, into hyper customized infrastructure that was very targeted for COVID treatment at the height of pandemic. And that is really an example of our mindset that we have to bring to the table. Every infrastructure around us has to be adaptable. And therefore it has to have some level of autonomy, connectivity, and intelligence to be able to manage it remotely. I'll give you a few other examples. We think about traffic cameras. We've already spent the money to put on those cameras. They really should be edge AI enabled to add new use cases like crowd monitoring to get a sense of are people respecting social distancing boundaries. And if they are not, how can you use that information to reach out to the stakeholders and inform them and say, hey, we need to change our collective behaviors for our collective benefit. And this mindset then applies to many other areas of our infrastructure. The key idea here is we did not choose to be in the middle of this crisis, but the way we react to it is a choice we're going to make, which means we cannot just bring things back to the way they were, whether it's remote telemedicine, whether it's remote education, whether it's about contact tracing, thermal checks, PPE compliance inside a building or outside. We have to really think about our infrastructure to have that resilience so that when the next crisis hits us, and it will, that's just the plain reality of life, that we are better prepared for it and we are not scrambling. To put it all together, we actually put out what we call a COVID-19 ebook that sort of comprehensively captures what Jesse very eloquently described, all the different solutions. And we took a citizen-centric view from the point you wake up in your home to how you use either a public or a private transit to get to your office, to what happens in your workplace, to how you come back, how you interact with your loved ones. And if there's a need, how do you do things like remote education and remote health checks? One of my colleagues at Intel made a statement that I would love to share with you. He said, we have seen more progress on the telemedicine front and the public health front in the last 6 months than we did in the last 20 years. Yeah. There was just this built-in resistance to change. There was a question about what are all the regulations will hold us back. And the unfortunate but good side effect of this crisis is that some of those barriers were broken, those silos were broken. And as a society, we were able to move forward and say, wow, this has got to be the new standard of care. Yeah. Why do I have to wait 3 days before getting a doctor's appointment, show up 30 minutes before, fill up the paperwork when this can be done? And look how easy it was. It doesn't solve all medical situations, sure, but even if you can unburden a part of it, that's a powerful change from where we are today.
Yeah.
So I can only talk about the technology aspect of it, but I think hopefully these examples paint a picture of how our city leaders, transportation agencies, building operators can use these technologies to get our infrastructure to the next level.
Wonderful. Well, now we have all these examples of what we can do when we remove those invisible barriers, work together, and simply roll up sleeves because it has to be done. So, Tom, I know you've been doing this for a long time and you know the real world applications of what it takes to be resilient and adaptable and all the things that Samir and Jesse were talking about. So what's your thought around all of this and what do you think needs to happen from a systems perspective?
Well, one good thing that's happened with that is this whole smart building conversation has, in a sense, proven that out because every few years in the smart building world, the priority changes a little bit. It doesn't mean the other ones go away, but at first it was all about energy efficiency. Then rather than KWH, we started talking about carbon and it was about sustainability. Then it was about occupant experience when we attract and retain talent. And now, obviously, it's about public health. But what's very interesting as far as we're working with our customers in this way is that let's go back to those digital systems we were talking about earlier that have been around for decades. What we've been doing is not packing in and adding new 5- and 6-figure technology in buildings. We've been taking the existing digital systems and pointing them at public health. So just think about automating a touchless experience. We're using existing access control, upgrading an existing elevator, and using existing digital signage to create an automated touchless experience. Same thing with another important phrase called social distancing. A lot of buildings have CO2 sensors and cameras and access control and even motion sensors for a light that tells you when you walk in a room. We're putting those things together to create a automated social distancing. So what we really want to do with innovation, and this is to be Sameer's line, is scale it. And so the best way to scale it is first, be as cost efficient and leverage as much technology as you already have, rather than looking at everything as a one-off. So as challenging and difficult as the public health situation has been when it comes to facilities, and again, not for us, it's not government policy or clinical or HR, we're about buildings. We've been pretty readily able to take existing buildings and existing building systems and create public health use cases out of what's in place.
I think that's so important because I know a lot of city leaders, and even on the industry side, people are wringing their hands saying, oh my gosh, I can't scramble fast enough to get all these new things, but repurposing what you already have and really looking at the resources are actually humans in your community with great ideas and resources and the technical infrastructure. And really it all comes down to a willingness to work together, right?
And this sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but what you were describing is people scrambling around looking at point solutions and technology, and that conversation literally could never end.
Yeah.
Right. So it's better to just take one step back and say, what is my use case? Well, if it's social distancing in the building, how do we satisfy that use case? So really the comforting thing is we can talk about what we want to accomplish first and not how first, and not have a hammer looking for a nail.
Great. What's a nice segue to my last and final question as we wrap up. So I know that community leaders all over the world are listening to you saying, gosh, I want to do this. I want to do this. And if they're starting at kind of step 0 or maybe step 1, what advice do you have for them? Kind of, if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently, pretending that we're at the beginning of this pandemic as people get started in their own communities? I'll invite anyone to jump in.
I can start. My simple advice is think big, start small, move fast. Whatever we are instrumenting is going to impact, hopefully positively, everyone's life. So it's complex. And rather than trying to solve all the problems at once, we need to break it down into smaller pieces. And what that does is, it helps you accomplish the solution you're looking to accomplish, while keeping in mind what your North Star is. But it also builds credibility and trust with your stakeholders. The second advice I have is data is a key part of everything today and going forward. Has been in the past, but I think pandemic is shining a big light on personal data as it relates to public health. Be open and transparent. Publish what I would call a data manifesto. And I'm not talking about 60 pages of legal talk that takes 3 lawyers to figure out. Just a 1-pager, simple language that says, here is the data we are collecting. Here is what we will use it for. And here are all the ways we are protecting personally identifiable information. And the third thing I would recommend, which has been referred to already through all these examples, is find partners. This is too important. This is too difficult and complex for someone to try to do it on their own. You've seen examples of Houston, Intel, Microsoft partnering. There are tons of such examples. Reach out to us. We are here to help. Social media, we cannot travel, but social media gives us a lot more avenues, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Reach out to us, look at the content we are putting out, give us feedback, good and bad. We are here to listen. We didn't do all this work to sit back and appreciate what we've done. We were waiting for this content, these solutions to be used for someone's benefit. So if you can do those 3 things, think comprehensively, but start small, think about data and privacy, and finally partnerships, you would have accomplished a lot.
Great advice. Perfect. Tom or Jesse?
Sure. I would say a similar thought, particularly like we talked about earlier, how smart city use cases can connect with the built environment, particularly in commercial real estate. We talked about just take one or two or three first responders, public health, maybe transportation, and connect with the real estate community and say, how can what you already have connect to the city in a way that we can accomplish some use cases? The other thing I would really like to be clear about is with all this digital system we talked about earlier in buildings, it doesn't have to cost a lot. Sometimes very little. You may already have it in place. Don't fall into the myth that either sustainability or smart buildings or connectivity is some double-digit thing that you have to wait over time to recover. There's a lot of capability in place, and find a few use cases and bridge between the real estate and the city stakeholders.
Great. Jesse, I'm sure a lot of this is resonating with you. If you're speaking to another city leader at the beginning of their journey, what advice would you give them?
I would love to add a magic tidbit that Tom or Samir didn't touch on, but they really hit the nail on the head. And I focused that on the fact that partnerships are really key, and I'm looking at partnerships as a conduit, so or a pipeline. So with conduits, you don't have to trench every time you want to add a wire or subtract a wire. This is the same deal with our partnerships. We lay the foundation, the infrastructure in place once. It's difficult to do that in some cases, but once you have it, you can add or subtract all the wires that you can put in there, and it's really a whole lot more efficient and seamless. And so anyway, I'd say that's a real key. Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Panelists, you have done well. I think we have prepared people watching and listening for what's coming next. Wonderful advice. I know I'm taking it to heart. So again, thank you for your time, your attention, and sharing all that you have with us. Thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.